Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the latest Trash Talk release, 119. Trash Talk are a hardcore punk band with power violence influence and tendencies. The Sacramento-based band have released 3 albums and a handful of EPs over their career. Now, to begin with, the band had a really raw production value to their music, and combined with their sound, it just gave this really aggressive vibe. It was also some of the most ferocious music written within the genre. On their 3rd studio release, there was a noticeable difference in production. It was a slightly clearer recording quality, and it was mastered and mixed a lot better than their previous works. Now, this mixed with the band's energy and aggression in their sound, it actually, for me, was the best Trash Talk release, because it just made this picture that Trash Talk were trying to convey before a hell of a lot clearer. It was almost like you could really feel the frontman's energy through your speakers. It was absolutely great. After that album, Eyes and Nines, they actually released another EP, which was called the Awake EP, and this was another noticeable step up in production. And personally, I actually thought on this EP the records were maybe a touch too clean for my liking. However, it had a much more punk rock feel to the whole EP because they focused a lot on the actual riffs. And I must admit, I enjoyed it a hell of a lot more than I expected to, and the songs were well written, and also the lengths were perfect of the songs. They didn't feel like they dragged or anything like that. So I ended up coming back to this album a hell of a lot, and it had a lot of memorability too. Now this obviously left me wondering what the new album would sound like. Anyway, the album is called 119, and the first thing I noticed when I put this on was the production value was actually really shockingly worse than even Eyes and Nines. They'd really gone down to like their previous releases, much dirtier, grittier sound. However, I personally think it's actually maintained the more punk rock feel, you know, based around riffs and things like that, as opposed to hardcore, despite the fact it is still a hardcore record. The opener, Eat the Cycle, is definitely a classic Trash Talk song. It opens up with a real, like, high energy, intense aggression and things like that you're used to in a Trash Talk song. Then it breaks down into half time, and it really is just a hell of a song. The next track, Exile on Broadway, is a bit of a classic hardcore song, I guess. It takes a lot of influence from things like Black Flag and that sort of thing. It's definitely a very obvious influence there. It starts with a very solid riff, but I feel like it drags on perhaps a little bit. It's still got a nice energy to it, but to be honest, I don't think Trash Talk could do anything without energy. Again, the next track, My Rules, is actually one of my personal favourites on the album. It's a super ferocious track that just clocks in at about a minute. It's got like some really nice bursts of really quick drumming and really intense feedback and things like that. Now, despite the fact I actually really did enjoy the first 2 tracks, I feel like I have to talk about one of my issues with the EP, one of the major issues with it, because it's definitely represented in the next song, F.E.B.N. I feel like this album just has maybe a few too many songs that were sort of mid-paced and didn't really change pace, and they were a little bit too long for what they were, focusing very much on the riff and things like that. But because it didn't really change up a great deal and it was focused on a very mid-paced riff, I actually, for the first time on a Trash Talk song, found myself to be a little bit bored by the end of the song. A couple of tracks to point out that I felt sort of ended up a bit like this were F.E.B.N, which was the single. I didn't really like it that much first time I heard it when it was released before the album, and it doesn't really sound that much better in context with the album either, to be honest. Other notable tracks like this would be Reasons, Apathy. I got this a little bit from Exile on Broadway, but not so much, and also the track Fuck Nostalgia. Having said that, there are a handful of other tracks that still have that really high octane energy. A couple of ones to note are ones like Uncivil Disobedience, Bad Habits, and Swinging to Pieces. One thing I really want to know about Uncivil Disobedience actually is that on this track the band make great use of some feedback and noisy things like that, and it really gives it this nice sharp edge that, added with Trash Talk's energy and intense sound, it just sounds great, is the only way to put it. It's going to go off live, I reckon. Now, the track after Uncivil Disobedience is actually the one that they were talking about doing with Odd Future. Now, for those of you who don't know, this record is the first record that they've released since signing to Odd Future Records. And as a result, they've become friends with Odd Future and decided to do a track with them. This track is called Blossom and Burn. Now, it's kind of in the vein of Hash Wednesday off of Eyes and Nines, with the really slow, sludgy riff and really visceral screams over the top, delivered from Lee, who's a great frontman. After about 40 seconds, the first verse comes in from the Odd Future lot, which is from Hodgy Beats, and his verse is, I actually really like it, it's great. He just had really nice energy. He goes freaking hard on this song. It sounds like he's pretty much screaming at the top of his lungs. Now, the next verse is delivered by the, I suppose, group leader of Odd Future, which is Tyler, the Creator. And actually, I'm a massive fan of his music and his voice and his energy on record, so I was expecting to really enjoy his verse, but I just feel it falls somewhat short because he isn't really raising his voice as such. He's just rapping like he would on record, and as a result it kind of gets swallowed by the instrumentals, and it's not necessarily hard to make out, but it just kind of feels like it's in the background when it should really be at the forefront, like Koji Beats' verse. Now, one of the first tracks to bring back their sort of more power violence-y side is the song Thanks But No Thanks. It opens with this really, really intense blast beat with some nice production behind it. Then it goes into this really nice breakdown, which I'll admit I think drags on a bit much, but it still sounds really, really good, and it's nice to see the blast beats and power violence influence back in there in that song. Now, the album closer, Dogman, is actually very possibly my favourite song on the album. It's a really interesting track. It opens up with the guitar and it just strikes a single chord, and this chord is just left to ring out while the drums are playing underneath it. Now this rung note eventually just sort of turns into feedback, and the drums are continuing to jam over this feedback. At the 30-second mark, the whole band kicks in with the bassist's really sort of growly, slightly deeper voice. And at this point in the song, it just sounds absolutely monstrous. It's going to be an absolute beast live at this point, I reckon. Throughout the tracks, there are really nice bursts of drums, just like really short blast beats and some fills and things like that all over the shop. And for this portion of the song, it just demonstrates some really great drumming. Now eventually, the guitars also drone out, and you just have this bass playing in the background. And again, eventually, the guitars that have rung out just go into feedback. And you have this bass just playing the riff underneath this feedback with the drummer just jamming the fuck out of this song. And at this point, it just sounds really, really great and noisy and abrasive. And I think it's a very fitting end to the album. Ultimately, I feel Trash Talk have made a solid effort that was somewhat disappointing, because I feel like the album could have been better if it had maybe a bit more variation in the pace, like maybe a couple too many of those mid-pace tracks. And also I feel like Trash Talk have really gave it their all in their previous releases, and I'm not saying they weren't energetic on this one. There definitely was energy there. They can't do anything without energy, I don't think, but it just wasn't as obvious, I should say, as their previous releases. Regardless, this album has delivered a handful of decent new songs which will be great to hear live. Stuff like Dogman, stuff like Uncivil Disobedience, Eat the Cycle, Exile on Broadway to a degree, and also Bad Habit. As a result of this sort of mixed bag, I'm thinking this album deserves sort of 6 out of 10, and that's really everything I have to say about the album. Until next time.